Now I'm pleased to introduce our next moderator, Greg Krissek, who is CEO Emeritus of Kansas Corn, and he'll be moderating our next panel along with Donnell, Rehagen, Jeff Davidman, and Lee Blank. Gentlemen, come on up. Greg is a retired CEO from Kansas Corn. He retired in May 2023. He began his career in agriculture in the 1990s at the Kansas Department of Agriculture, working as a research analyst and then as Assistant Secretary of Agriculture. Greg first joined the staff of the Kansas Corn and Kansas Grain Sorghum Associations from 2000 to 2003. He was Director of Government Affairs also at an ethanol plant design company called ICM and a manager at Kennedy & Co. Greg returned to Kansas Corn to serve as CEO in 2014 until his retirement. Over the years, Greg has served on many ethanol and agricultural association boards and on several ethanol plant boards of directors. He remains active in agricultural groups, including the U.S. Grains Council and the Triazine Network. Please welcome Greg to moderate this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And I would echo what Sarah mentioned. We've had a lot of information today, and we're just getting started. The gentleman on the panel with me, we have a lot more to dig into detail-wise, I think, for you on the status of biofuels and where we're going, especially here in the US of A. As you might guess from what Sarah read, I'm an unabashed proponent of biofuels and have been since I really started my career in 1989. But the industries that we're going to visit about today look tremendously different. They're very different from what I might have been involved with in the early 1990s, especially in Kansas. I have always felt that the productive capacity of farmers, when you combine them with the ingenuity of engineers and ultimately the blenders and refiners of the fuel, really give us unlimited scope that we can move towards if we can have the right systems to do that. And I enjoyed the opportunity of working on market development and kind of the mix between the public policy impacts as well as just the pure business demand and getting the technology right to let these become commercialized fuels to help meet society's needs. So without further ado, again, we have Donnell, Jeff, and Lee with us on the panel. Each are going to have an opportunity to make some introductory comments, and then we'll move to discussion and your questions through the Slido app after we proceed that far. But first, let me introduce Donnell Rehagen. He joined the Clean Fuels Alliance America in 2004 as the Chief Operating Officer, and he became CEO there in 2016. With more than 115 member companies, the Clean Fuels Alliance America is the leading U.S. organization representing biodiesel, renewable diesel, and SAF fuel industries. As CEO, Donnell works with the members, the board of directors, to ensure the industry has a clear, sharp vision of the future, full of growth and opportunities for the members it serves. Donnell has a master's in public administration from the University of Missouri-Columbia and a bachelor's degree in computer information systems from Missouri State University. Please welcome Donnell to the panel. Donnell, introductories.
Well, thank you all for being here and hanging around, first of all, I suppose, right? It's late in the afternoon and we're keeping you from the reception. But yeah, I'm with Clean Fuels Alliance America. We are the national trade association, as Greg said, for the biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel industries. We're headquartered just down the road in Jefferson City, Missouri. And that's a kind of a shout out to our roots, our origin. We were formed originally as the National Soy Diesel Development Board, and then shortly thereafter, you might remember us more so as the National Biodiesel Board. So we worked hard to bring biodiesel to the commercial marketplace, and we did that quite successfully. And over the last decade, we started to see the emergence of renewable diesel, which is a similar but different fuel. and then most recently, sustainable aviation fuel. So our trade association represents the whole entire supply chain, all the way from farmers who work the fields, producing the feedstocks, all the way through feedstock processors, fuel producers, fuel distributors, and then fuel retailers. So we're excited about our future and what we've been able to accomplish to this point, but I think some of our best days are ahead of us. I'm looking forward to talking about that with the panelists, so thank you.
Thank you, Donnell. Our next panelist is Jeff Davidman. Jeff oversees Delta Airlines' state and local government affairs efforts around the country and has direct responsibility for Delta's MSP hub, I assume that's Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Got it right.
And the city of Atlanta, as well as the Midwest portion of the country. Jeff has represented Delta's state and local government entities around the country since 2004, 20-year anniversary.
Yeah, that's
Excellent.
right.
During his tenure, Jeff has been instrumental in securing state and local government support for multiple Delta initiatives, including successful merger with Northwest Airlines. And prior to joining Delta, Jeff worked for 10 years in various positions throughout Minnesota state government, including working as a senior policy advisor for Governor Tim Pawlenty. Please welcome Jeff to the panel.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, and it's great to be here today. It's great to be in Kansas City. As I arrived at the airport, I got to see Delta's newest Sky Club in our system, so if anyone's flying out today or tomorrow and you have that opportunity, I encourage you to stop by there. It just shows that we're growing here in Kansas City and in the middle part of the country. Well, guess what I'm here to talk about? Guess why I'm here? Guess why I'm on the panel? It's great to be here to be able to talk about sustainable aviation fuel, and I've been here for most of the day listening to the panel, and so the best part is, usually when I speak to groups around the country, I'm explaining what SAF is, or sustainable aviation fuel is. I know everyone in this room already knows that, so I don't have to explain the what. What I want to start by today is explaining the why. Why is Delta Airlines in the room today? Why are we here talking about SAF? Why are we working on it really all over the country from a policy perspective and a development standpoint? Well, it really starts with Delta's sustainability goals, of which we've said is to be carbon neutral by 2050. So you have to start thinking about how do you get to that? And as we look at that, it's really two parts for Delta Airlines. The first is, what can we do on the ground? So if you are at the airport today, you might see different ground equipment that's being electrified. So the tugs that push your plane out, the baggage loaders that put the luggage on, we're moving that to electrification where we can. We're removing single-use plastics from our planes and taking away plastic cups and replacing them with paper cups, which is actually more difficult than you might think, but we're in the process of doing that. We're working with our supply chain, so it's not just Delta, but it's everybody in Delta's supply chain trying to row in the same direction to meet these goals. That's great, and we can do a lot of things in that space. But that is only 2% of Delta's carbon footprint is what happens on the ground. 98% of our carbon footprint is what happens in the air. So when we're really trying to think about how we get to 2050 and our goals, that's what we have to look at. So now we look at three different pieces there. So the first is the what we fly. So we are constantly bringing in new aircraft that are fuel efficient and quieter into our fleet. And by doing that over a course of a number of years, and we have that program going, that's about 25%. To get to that 98%, it's about 25%. The how we fly, so working with our partners at the FAA, what routes do we take, where do we speed up, where do we slow down, how we fly the aircraft sounds great, we have a little bit of control over that, that's 3 to 5%. So we're at 30% of our goal. We truly believe at Delta Airlines that 70% of how we're gonna get to our 2050 goal is through sustainable aviation fuel, through SAF. It's this, we call it sort of this miracle product that we know that works today. We know it works today. It's in our planes. We are using it. We've had a flight from London to New York on our partner Virgin Atlantic that was 100% SAF. Fly across and it works. We're flying it out of California where they've had a low carbon fuel standard. We're using it there. So it's this, we know the product works. The infrastructure that we already use today for conventional jet fuel allows us to use it for sustainable aviation fuel as well. So when we think about our aircraft, when we think about our engines, it's already certified at a blend rate of 50%, and we're working 50% SAF blended with 50% conventional jet. And we're working with the manufacturers of both the engines and the airplanes to improve that blending rate every single year. So yes, it's 50% today. The hope is that's going to go to 60, 70, 80, 90, all the way to 100% over time. We know it works in our infrastructure at the airports. So the same pipelines that we bring conventional jet fuel into the airports in can bring sustainable aviation fuel. It can go into the same fuel tanks because once it's blended, it doesn't know the difference. You can't tell the difference between the fuels. And as I said, we know it works in the planes. So what's the problem? Why is this so difficult? Well, there is not nearly enough. In fact, there's almost none of it that exists. Even though we know this project works, there's almost none of it in the world today. So let me just give you a few numbers. In 2023, in the United States of America, we produced 25 million gallons of SAF in the US. This year, worldwide, I think they're projected to produce about 600 million gallons of SAF worldwide. Delta Airlines alone uses 4 billion gallons of jet fuel every single year. And when you start to think about US carriers as a whole, that's 35 billion gallons of jet fuel. And when you go to the whole world, and I heard someone say it earlier today, this is not a US issue we're trying to solve. This is worldwide. This demand is worldwide. It's far in excess of 35 billion gallons. So we have committed to the USF Grand Challenge to try and get 10% of our jet fuel by 2030, which for Delta Airlines is 400 million gallons, for the US carriers is 3 billion gallons. I said it before, we produced 25 million gallons in the US in 2024. We need to get that to 3 billion gallons in just when I started talking about this, it was 7 years, so it's been over a year that we've been talking about this. It's now 6 years to get to that goal. And what we know, and I know what I'm looking forward to talking about later in the panel, is we know what we know and we know what we don't know. So Delta, I can tell you, I can sit here today as the consumer to tell you, we want this, we need this to get to our goals. We also know we have no idea how to make it. We don't know how to grow the feedstock that's needed. We don't know how to produce it once we have it. But everybody in this room and others in other industries do know how, and that by working together throughout the value chain, we can solve this problem. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk more about how we do that, working together.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I think you've raised a number of opportunities that we want to talk about as we move forward. Also want to introduce Lee Blank. Lee Blank is the CEO of Summit Carbon Solutions. And for some of you in the agribusiness, Kansas City agribusiness community know that he was a board member of our organization for a time, and then new opportunities presented itself. Summit Carbon Solutions is a leading company in carbon capture technology. Previously, Lee had a long career as a leader in agribusiness at GFG Ag Services, LLC, Twin Rivers Technologies, Alternative Energy Sources, and ADM. He graduated from Iowa State. Now, do I have to say again the Go Cyclones thing?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You absolutely
For
do.
Lee's benefit, Go Cyclones. And he holds a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Business. Please welcome Lee to the panel.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to be here. And Bob, again, congratulations. Congratulations, Erica. Thank you guys for having me. It's really great to be back and be part of this organization and this event. Let's talk about what Summit Carbon Solutions is. It's referred to as a very large infrastructure project, and that is true. It is. But it's also a partnership. And Jeff, I like your terminology about there's a lot of stakeholders and there's a lot of partnerships to be had here. And we've built our business model around a partnership with agriculture. I don't come from oil and gas, and as many know, I come from agriculture. But the stakeholders and the people that we are actually engaged with on a daily basis are agricultural stakeholders. And so our efforts and what we're trying to accomplish is a partnership with the ethanol industry and a partnership with the U.S. farmer. And as we think about it in that fashion and how we think about our company philosophy, that's how we believe you gain adoption on something of this size and scope. It's a very granular effort. We deal very closely with the U.S. Farm Gate to help them understand the benefits of what this project will bring. 57 ethanol plants partnered in a shared model to bring value to the U.S. ethanol industry. And again, I get very excited when I think about, it's a tough time in ag, and we've heard about it today. But there is a pathway, and this pathway is built on a partnership. between Summit Carbon, the ethanol industry, the U.S. farmer, and frankly, the energy industries. For the first time, as many of you may know, for a long time, ag and energy did not necessarily get along all that well. As a matter of fact, they tended to be a little bit, didn't have time for each other. That's really changing. We are creating an industry now where energy and ag are thinking about liquid fuels and how do we advance those programs. How do we work with the airline industries to give them the amount of feedstock, which is really what brings the ethanol industry into this, the amount of feedstock that they need to actually drive those initiatives that they have for their industry. And so it's a really exciting time, in my opinion, for U.S. agriculture. I think about how we can drive the ethanol industry into that next economic position. Those economics filtering back to the U.S. farm gate based on more demand for U.S. ethanol, and the U.S. farmer being able to deliver that money, those economics to his balance sheet. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's what's driving me to do this project. I asked many times, why are you doing this project? It's a little bit controversial, and there's lots of things. I'm doing this project because I think it's right for U.S. agriculture, and I think it's going to be great for the U.S. farmer. We just got to execute on it.
Thank you very much, Lee, and I think there are a number of topics that we'll want to talk about in Q&A as well.
Sure.
So let me plant the first seed here for questions, and probably mostly Donnell and Jeff to respond to this first one. What is really needed to scale the industry, SAF specifically, in order to meet what Jeff is seeking? And you both, I assume, have thoughts here. And again, from my background, it's always intriguing public policy or the actual business case, and which, I don't know if it's a chicken and the egg sort of thing, but which is needed when to get us to that scale. Whichever one of you would like to take a shot.
Sure. I've heard it spoken about through several of the other panels today, this theme of policy certainty. And as a fuel industry and an energy industry, and I'm sure the airlines are the same way, the more clear those signals are from the policy makers, the easier it is to be certain about those investments that need to be made. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They're all in, right? The airlines are all in on that. And as Jeff said, they just need the fuel to start showing up. And so for us as fuel producers, it becomes, that decision becomes wrapped around how much certainty can be there to make those investments for those plants possible. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars, a couple or $3 billion just to build one plant. And so those decisions can't be made with just a flip of a coin. And so federal policy and increasingly state policy is becoming more and more important. And the more that those federal and state policies can complement each other versus go against each other, that is better to bring that certainty to the investors that need to make those important decisions to get this industry off the way the airlines need us to get it done.
Yeah, I would build on that. I'll start with on the policy side, absolutely. And I think kudos to the federal government, and we heard from our elected officials and the Department of the USDA earlier today as well. And kudos to them, because in the Inflation Reduction Act, they really started by planning the first base of what the industry needs. It needs policies and it needs those incentives in order to get this industry up and running. And so, everyone here has heard today what's already in the Inflation Reduction Act, and so it started that conversation. And the problem with the Inflation Reduction Act is simply it's just too short of time, right? So each tax credit is only in place for about 4 years. We've got one that's about to sunset, then we've got another one that's going to sunset in 2 years. And when you're talking about the type of not just hundreds of millions, but potentially billion-dollar economic investments that producers need to make in order to build the facilities that are going to be needed, what I'm hearing is they just need more time certainty to it. And I know folks in Washington are looking at that as they look at that going forward. And as you mentioned, then the states have come in on the next piece, which is sort of making these incentives stackable on top of each other. So not a surprise to anyone in this room, I think, but the Midwest has really been leading in this, and this really is a great opportunity for the Midwest. Nobody in the world has taken the lead in SAF. And so not only does the U.S. have that chance, but the Midwest has that chance because of the feedstocks that are grown here and the history of producing these types of fuels here. And so you've seen Illinois passed the SAF tax credit. Minnesota passed the SAF tax credit in 2023. Both those states, about a month apart from each other. Nebraska just passed one here in 2024. And then if you go all the way to the coast, actually, interestingly enough, the state of Washington was the third one to pass a tax credit. So now you've got states stacking on top of feds, the federal government starting the innovation, the states coming next. So policy, extremely important. And then to build on that, and what we talked about, I think, in our beginning was the coalition, that everybody through the value chain needs to try and work through this. So at Delta, we've got a couple different ones I'll highlight. One is a group called Americans for Clean Aviation Fuel, or ACAF, which is working together, and I think there's a number of members in this room here today to try and work on those federal policy pieces and try and figure out what's needed long-term at the federal level. And then just something we did last week at Delta Airlines, looking at something called the Minnesota SAF Hub, which actually is looking at this as almost like an incubator for one state, looking all the way from farm all the way to plane and everything in between from a value chain standpoint to try and answer those difficult questions, not because Minnesota is the only place that can do it, but it is a place where we can start and then we can take that and learn, and it's a model that can use the rest of the way. So definitely policy, and then definitely sort of coalition partnership through the value chain to try and solve these problems.
It does remind me, to the certainty point, does remind me a bit of the ethanol blenders tax credit and the renewals towards the end of it, and the variety that was going on with state production incentives and things like that. So if the certainty can be found, I'm sure that would help with momentum. I'm going to stick with this topic for just one more question, and then I have one for Lee, because there are some that are starting to come in on Slido. And Jeff, if you want to take this on, right now, and not to use your company's name, but there's a delta between the price of regular jet fuel and SAF. And obviously credits should help with that, but what sort of analysis does the airline industry go through in saying what can we afford to pay for the SAF?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're right. Currently, SAF is anywhere between 2 to 3 times the amount of conventional jet fuel, and that is not a number that's probably sustainable over a long period of time. And that's why the tax credits at the beginning of scaling up this industry are so important, because it helps. Where the cost really is upstream. It's really in the infrastructure that's needed in order to begin to produce it. And so that's why these credits are important short term. In order to get as close to jet parity as possible. I think early on we won't get there completely, but the hope is after having the tax credits in place for a certain period of time, they won't be needed long term, as similar to what we're seeing in other forms of transportation. Once the infrastructure is up and running, it's going to be something that will be able to be self-sustaining. The other piece in addition to tax credits that we're looking at and finding success, and again, we had an announcement about this last week, is we're discovering demand consortiums. So there are businesses who are also worried about their own carbon footprints as they are traveling. And so part of what they are saying is we will pay additional dollars for SAF in order to get those Scope 3 benefits. And so we are seeing companies, we announced last week as part of the Minnesota SAF Hub, that there are companies like Ecolab and Xcel Energy and others who are willing to pay a bit of a premium for their employees when they're traveling in order to offset the cost of SAF. So we have to be creative, but you're right, 2 to 3 times conventional jet's not sustainable. We don't think we'll need the credits long term, we need them in the short term, and then hopefully get it closer to parity going forward.
And I may be presuming something I shouldn't, but in my experience, even if oil prices went up, meaning jet prices went up, usually agricultural prices move with that. So it's not necessarily, even though we've heard lots about a very bountiful crop and potentially lower commodity prices, just because the traditional fuel goes up, it's very possible SAF would go up with that too. At least that's my experience, and if you tell me if I have that wrong. So we'll give you guys a little bit of a break here, and we'll come to Lee. And Lee, can you describe, in my view, the carbon footprint of the ethanol is driving a lot of discussion of how ethanol works in a number of things, whether it be SAF or others. Can you describe a little bit about the benefits that the pipeline with the CO2 from the ethanol plant and Summit's ultimate goal of what they do with CO2, how that will help with carbon footprinting for the ethanol industry.
Yeah, certainly. So the issue with the infrastructure is the fact it's the largest carbon intensity reduction the ethanol industry can get. It's between 30 and 35 points, which really drives them into a position where they can be eligible for sustainable aviation fuel. And also for the low carbon fuel markets that are available even today. So it's a massive drop. I mean, the average ethanol plant runs around 55 with their CI score, maybe a little higher. And ultimately, with the sequestration of their carbon, it puts them into a much more offensive position when it comes to the carbon markets and the various other markets that will be available. And so it's why the ethanol industry has adopted the project, with such robust readiness. They want and need to be a part of a carbon reduction of this size and scope, and it means a great deal for the marketplace and the markets that they can actually be a part of. And again, they can do other things to reduce their carbon score. You can, CHP, you can put in solar, you can put in wind, and it reduces the plant scores by 2-3 points. But CCS reduces by 35, and that's a big piece of that 50 and lower that they need to be a part of to open them up to these additional markets. So it's an extremely important piece for the ethanol industry.
And as we look forward into the carbon focus, it certainly is. Would you care to describe, you've obviously are working through the opportunity to get permission for the pipeline.
Correct.
But it also, I believe, at different states, and ultimately where you might sequester it, there will be regulations around that as well.
Yeah, certainly.
How's that dynamic working out?
Yeah, so again, CO2 is not FERC regulated, so it's not an oil and gas pipeline. So every state has a say in how you bring this infrastructure through the state. And so, for instance, in Iowa, we have a permit, we call it internally 1.0. The Iowa permitting process was over by the time we added some additional volumes to our particular pipeline system. So now we're going back to the Iowa Utility Commission for a second permit in the state of Iowa to build the project on those laterals. North Dakota itself is a great example of 2 permits that are needed. We need a permit to actually build the pipeline from the Public Service Commission in North Dakota, and we also need a permit to sequester, which are very big permits, and that's from the NDIC in North Dakota. All of those hearings are completed, and now we're just waiting on a ruling in North Dakota from those 2 organizations as to our ability to move the project forward there. Minnesota, again, we have a short line in Minnesota that we've had our hearings and we've finished. We anticipate a ruling in December or January in Minnesota as well. And that leaves us with South Dakota. South Dakota, we do not have a permit application with South Dakota today. We are going to apply soon. What we're doing in South Dakota is we're taking a different approach in the sense that we want to find landowners that actually will accommodate the project. And so we're spending time, landowner by landowner, to bring as many stakeholders to the table that believe the project and what we're accomplishing and are favorable to it. That way we can drive as good of a route through the state of South Dakota as we possibly can. And we'll keep doing that as we move forward. We're having great success at that, by the way. A lot of landowners are accommodating and want to speak to us about the project, and so we've been very pleased with that. But it's a long process, and we speak of surety. This is an $8.5 billion project, and we've spent a fair amount of capital already. And so certainty means a great deal to Summit Carbon Solutions, I can assure you of that, as it does with you all. So it's something we focus on as well, heavily.
One quick follow-up to that. In a very ideal world timeline for getting a pipeline built?
Yeah, we would hope to break ground in 2025. It'll be late. And then we would also then hope to come into operations in 2026. I would say that'd be late in the year. It's frankly, it's not a difficult process. It's a big process, but it's not overly complicated. And so ultimately, it's once we get started, you really move fairly quickly. And but again, we will not start the pipeline project until we have the Dakota permits and the Iowa permit at a minimum.
Okay, thank you. Donnell, I'm going to ask you this question, and if you want to punt, you can, but the organization you represent now has a wide variety of interests and even decent, maybe a few wider numbers of feedstocks involved. How do you keep everybody rowing in the same direction?
Well, that is a really good question. We do deal with that on a regular basis, but it's really about, we're still a fairly small group of players in the space, and so over the decades that we've been at this, everybody's kind of gotten to know each other and understands and really respects the role that each player brings to the table. We're really blessed to have an industry that understands what's good for one is good for all. Not to say that we don't have our moments where it gets challenging. We've got, I talked about our formation from soybean organizations who were looking for an outlet for soybean oil back in the 1990s. I mean, that's how we were formed. And now we find used cooking oil, animal fats, distillers corn oil from ethanol, canola all of them growing in their place for feedstock providers into our industry. And so you add to that biodiesel producers that have been around for 30 years and renewable diesel producers that are newer to the game, maybe the last decade. Most of our renewable diesel production has actually come online in the last 5 years. And now sustainable aviation fuel producers. So our industry is definitely changing. And I've told some folks just last week we were talking about this, and I said, our industry is nothing like it was 5 years ago. And I think if we had this same conversation 5 years from now, I would be saying the same thing. Our industry 5 years from now will be nothing like it is today. And so we're built around that ability to transition. We've always been challenged by uncertainty. The tax credit that we've talked about that's now is being transferred to a clean fuels tax credit. Used to be a tax credit pretty much for our industry in the form of a blender's tax credit. But that credit was on and off over the decades it's been in place. So we laugh about it, but we cry about it at the same time, I think. We're an industry that has just always faced uncertainty. And I'm proud of the fact that if it ever early on got that hard that people wanted to quit, they certainly didn't do it, and we're not going to do it now. So we're proud to be resilient in that way.
And so a bit of a follow-up for you and Jeff. In terms of, so I will say it this way, my perception. Agriculture, we're a great community, we're a great industry, but sometimes some of us like our feedstocks better than other feedstocks. I guess, Jeff, from an airline perspective, the feedstock getting to SAF, is the airline industry agnostic? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's the exact word I would use. So Delta, and I think the whole airline industry would say the same thing. We're feedstock neutral. We are technology neutral. It has to have a score under the federal definition of a minimum of 50% greenhouse gas emissions reduction. I know we talked about, I think a lot of panels before us about how that scoring happens, and we certainly are in agreement that the 40B credits need some additional work in 45Z to make sure that Midwest feedstocks can be used because it's such a great opportunity for the Midwest. But yeah, we are feedstock neutral, we are technology neutral, and what's really exciting about this industry is, what we might see today isn't going to be what we see 5 years from now, isn't going to be what we see 10 years from now. Innovation is going to continue, but there's a lot of great opportunities with all the feedstocks out there.
And with that, again, a little bit of my background with a technology provider and knowing some of the philosophy that was taken at the time related to either public policy or just making it a business case. Do either of you see technological improvements coming that make it more cost effective and or lower the carbon score?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there's going to continue to be a lot of innovation. As Jeff mentioned, we're just starting from the SAF production standpoint. And so the production process is extremely similar to turning crude oil into jet fuel. So that part of it is not hard. When you start looking at what are the inputs, what are the costs, quite frankly, the feedstocks are the primary cost of that fuel. And so whatever can be done from a feedstock standpoint to lower those CI scores can be effective when you look at the policy output of that fuel. So We're working along with the soybean industry as well, primarily to try to push that CI score down for soybean oil, making it maybe a more prominent and prevalent feedstock in all three of those fuels. But what's the opportunity for new feedstocks? You know, there's always been talk about algae as being a feedstock for renewable fuels. It just becomes a question of when do you get to that economic tipping point where that makes sense. And we're talking about an industry looking for 35 billion gallons. Our industry right now, this year, will produce about 5 billion gallons of biodiesel, renewable diesel, and just a little bit of SAF. Our industry's goal is to be a 6 billion gallon industry by 2030. So that 6 to 35 just for SAF is a long gap there. So I've got to believe that if that demand is real, which I believe it is for SAF, we've got a growing demand for on-road, off-road as well with rail and marine. I've got to believe there's going to be a lot of innovation in the feedstock space, and I really am counting on our country's farmers to provide that first initial big kick.
And the only thing I would add to that from a technology standpoint, which could be the other question of electric planes, and I get that a lot around the country. So, you know, we're 70 to 80 years away from an electric plane that you in this room would want to. I'm getting on a plane to go from Kansas City to Atlanta at 7 o'clock tonight. That plane is 70 to 80 years away from being electric. You might see some things that we call like taxi planes that are 4-seaters that can go 25, 30 miles. They're going to play a very different role in the transportation of our customers. But the plane that you're used to getting on and going the distances you're wanting to go for from an electric standpoint, those are 70 to 80 years away. SAF really is the solution that not just Delta, but the airline industry, and not just the US, but the world is looking for. And I say that confidently because the United Nations has said it. You're seeing it in the EU. You just saw it in Korea in the last couple of days as well. This is not just something we're talking about at one company, one country. This is being viewed as the solution around the world.
Responding to one slide of question, would either of you care to offer, if it can be scaled up to the 35 billion gallon per year industry, what becomes the price delta then to regular jet, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we truly believe if we can get it scaled, it will get close to jet fuel cost parity for reasons that we've talked about today that you mentioned in your comments as well. So once we get this industry scaled, we really believe we'll get to that point.
Okay. I think we have just a couple minutes, so I guess I'd offer each of you just kind of last comments for the group. Lee, would you be willing to go first?
Yeah, certainly. Jeff said it, and I think that's how I view this is, you know, this is a really wonderful time for agriculture to lead and to lead into markets that are really innovative, very new, and have a really strong consumptive demand. If you think about the ethanol industry today, it's losing a bit of ground, frankly, as better fuel efficiency, EVs take a little bit of a hold in certain areas. Corn crop continues to grow. It's in a bit of a box. And so from the perspective of the U.S. corn farmer, I get really excited when I think about 35 billion gallons of capacity. And again, the U.S. corn farmer won't take all of that because as Donnell and I, we talked, it's all comers, right, to get this accomplished. But just think what that can do for U.S. agriculture. Again, I've been around ag a long time, and I've seen very defensive agriculture coming out of the 70s and the 80s where we were very high on inventories and everything just felt very sluggish. We feel like that a little bit now. But ultimately, we have a pathway for U.S. agriculture to lead and to grow and to really be an outstanding industry for the youth and young folks that want to be part of agriculture as we move forward. So that's how I view it. It's just wonderful for me to think about U.S. agriculture leading into more of a technological role that's got some energy base to it. So very excited about it. It's a long road. There's a lot of work, but we're going to get it done, and I'm really anxious to watch it unfold.
Jeff?
Yeah, first of all, I'll just say thank you again for having us today and having me here today. It's really a great opportunity, and the questions have been phenomenal. And I would almost say I need to turn them back to everybody in this room because what I said at the beginning is kind of the truth. Like, we know what we know. We know how to run an airline, and we know SAF is what we need to be able to hit our goals. But after that, we really don't know. We don't have the answers. The answers are really going to be everybody in this room and everybody in the value chain coming together to try and solve it. And so the questions have been great. I've given the best answers that I know in 2024. That's going to change over time. But really, what I'd like to leave you with is just making sure you understand what an opportunity it is, not only for the Midwest farmer, Midwest agriculture, because truly when I said it, nobody in the world is leading in this yet. The opportunity is not only in the United States specifically, but it's really in the Midwest specifically. But the answers to the questions that you've asked and many more that we've been asking, those answers lie in this room and working together. And so looking forward to doing that over the next number of years.
Thanks, Jeff. Donnell?
Yeah, again, thank you all. And as Jeff and Lee said, it's really an exciting time, and great opportunities are in front of us, in front of agriculture. And U.S. agriculture has fed the world for decades, and to a great degree, they're beginning to fuel the world. We're seeing record exports of our fuels this year. You might look at me like, why is that happening? If there's such a demand here in the United States, but as Jeff particularly said, this is not a new phenomenon here in the United States, and it's certainly not a new phenomenon in the world. And so those opportunities, exports, greater demand here and on-road, off-road, as I said, rail and marine are a couple of other industries that are going to be competing with Jeff's industry for these fuels. It's all because of this drive to reduce carbon. And that's happening not just here in the United States, but around the globe. And so farmers and agriculture, particularly here in the U.S., have an opportunity to be a worldwide leader in decarbonization. So that's one of the reasons why we're really excited to finally see this industry that we've been working on for 30 years get to a point where it's got a high degree of relevance, it's got a high degree of attention, and it's got a high degree of focus that's being put on it, not just, again, here in the United States, but globally, but also from a federal and a state perspective, from a policy standpoint. Lots of people are interested in wanting to see success across this whole entire stage. And when those things can come together with the ingenuity and the initiative of U.S. agriculture, I can't imagine that we're not going to be talking about this 10 years from now as a high degree of a success story. So stay tuned and be watching really close. There's going to be some great things happening in the next several years.
Gentlemen, I'll ask you to stay right here for just a moment. Let's show our appreciation for the panel.
Great job.